Over 7 years ago, when we first started working in the private placement business, it seemed like everyone had a project in need of funding. Though many of these projects possessed great intentions and innovative ideas, very few had enough capital to invest in a real program. With this obstacle in the way, most in the PPP market failed in their attempts to access project funding, leaving brokers and investors frustrated. In today's PPP market, things have stayed the same in some ways, and are very different in others. After watching the demand for project funding skyrocket, many unsuccessful PPP brokers had enough. With a growing number of investors looking for project funding, private placement program brokers started to look for a way to capitalize on this demand, whether it was ethical or not. In this video, we will explain viable ways to fund projects, while alerting you of a few scams that are far too common in today's private placement industry. As most people know, the typical way to fund large-scale fund projects is by investing in private placement programs. Unfortunately, many investors now think there are other methods to fund projects, seeking new programs with lower entry requirements. As you'll see, in most cases, these smaller alternatives turn out to be scams. To help you spot them in the future, we have provided a great list for our viewers. Covering 5 of the most common scams in private placement, it gives you everything you need to stay safe and productive. Let's review the most common project funding scams right now. Trust me, you should pay extremely close attention to these tricks or it could cost you some big money. The SBLC leasing scam. In recent years, the SBLC, or Standby Letter of Credit, has become very popular in the private placement business. In most cases, providers claim to have the SBLC issued from the bank for a small upfront fee. Supposedly, once the SBLC has been received by the investor, they can use it as collateral for private placement and other opportunities. Though this sounds great to inexperienced investors, the truth is, SBLC leasing never works. First of all, SBLCs are not discountable instruments, and no bank will cut an SBLC for a small upfront fee. Second, if the investor plans to attain an SBLC, they must give the full value to the bank before they issue it. In short, you cannot walk into a bank with $1 million and get a $10 million in SBLC. Despite what many private placement programs brokers may claim, leased SBLCs are not the way to go, no matter what type of transaction you are pursuing. Bank instrument leasing. The concept of bank instrument leasing has been growing in popularity since 2000. With more and more private placement program brokers entering the business, it has become a niche that has polluted the private placement market. The problem is, leased bank instruments can rarely be used in transactions, whether it's private placement or otherwise. Think about it. Could you take a leased car into a bank and get a loan against it? The answer is obvious. Since you've only leased the asset and do not have full ownership of it, no bank will accept it as personal collateral. Though many eager brokers may tell you otherwise, bank instrument leasing see and only serve as proof of temporary collateral and nothing else. Small private placements. As we have stated in past videos, private placement investments require a large amount of capital to invest. Though there are programs which require smaller amounts, the truth is, you still need to have a lot of money to invest in private placement. In most cases, the investor must have $100 million or more in liquid assets to even apply. Unfortunately, every investor seems to have interest in private placement, and due to this growing demand, brokers now see it as an opportunity. In today's private placement market, ironically, you hear of more small programs than you do large ones. In fact, the private placement program business has now become horribly polluted with small programs and small investors, both looking for something that doesn't exist. Do yourself a favor. If you don't have $50 million in net worth, chalk it up. Even though other alternative investments may be great for you, private placement is only for a select few. Joint venture funding scam. In recent years, I've started to hear about a project funding scam which is a little trickier than most. In this case, the JV partner leases the instrument to the investor for an upfront fee and a portion of the private placement program profits. Since most investors are new to private placement, they feel encouraged to move forward with the leased instrument since they are partnering in a private placement investment. In addition, the investor feels comfortable because conversation typically shifts to the high yields of private placement programs and takes attention away from the instrument leasing process. The problem is, most private placement investments never turn out as planned. For example, if the program did not perform, the investor would spend $400,000 for a worthless bank instrument while the provider kept the leasing commissions. Though this may sound far-fetched, it's become a common, back-end, scam in private placement programs, and there's little to no recourse for investors. Upfront fee to fund projects. If you are trying to fund a project, you should never pay an upfront fee to attain funding. I don't care if they have sample funding letters and proof of past funding success. It's never worth it. We have been in the business for several years, and we have only heard of a few successful funding opportunities that required fees. We know you may love your project more than life itself, but you should always take a step back and be smart. If you did choose to pursue a project funding opportunity with fees, make sure to ask yourself a few questions beforehand. First, what proof does the funding provider have of their performance? Second, where is the money going, and how do you get it back if funding doesn't occur? Third, do the fees, time frame, and other details sound feasible? Last, does the funding provider have references from past investors? If you ask yourself these basic questions, it should always be an easy decision. Though project funding scams come in all shapes and sizes, we have listed the most common schemes throughout this video. With the desperation of private placement program brokers growing, unfortunately, project funding scams are on the rise. Since very few brokers in the private placement business are closing deals, many of them try to make commissions in any way possible. Whether it's by sugarcoating details or putting investors in harm's way, it's all about the paycheck for some brokers. For this reason and others, please be safe, because greed is a key variable in every private placement transaction. In summary, the private placement market has become flooded with funding scams over the last decade. Though these scams are everywhere, the truth is, you can still be successful. In most instances, the first funding provider will not be the right pick, so be patient. Remember, you never want to become desperate or anxious, or you can put yourself at great risk. You may want your project funded immediately, but the fact is, it's never worth rolling the dice. Ask yourself, would you put $400,000 on one hand of poker? The answer is simple, just like identifying scams should be after watching this video.